Okay, I see a few people are still coming into the waiting room, but I don't want to take up any more of our time today as we have four excellent presentations getting ready for y'all. Please, as you know, your labs will start in large group, then we'll do some Q&A time in a large group followed by breakouts. So we have four leader labs today. To give you an idea of what today's going to look like, Havilah is going to kick us off. We'll spend some time in question and answer with them, then a little bit of small group time. Megan will then join us to present her leader lab, followed by again a small group, and then we'll have a break. Again, during that break around 2:30, we're going to ask that you step away from your computers completely so then we can come back in for the second half of this leader lab with renewed energy, ready to fully engage. Please grab yourself a sparkling water, a coffee, a bottle of water, whatever that might be, to keep you engaged and ready to listen and learn and engage with our speakers. And then after we come back from break, Michael will be giving a leader lab and Freshta will be wrapping this up. So again, we'll have four leader lab presentations, each followed by a small group. In between the second and the third, we will have a 10-minute break that we will ask everyone to step away. So for the next hour and a half here, I ask that you be fully present and ready to engage in learning with our student presenters today. So with that, I will pass the microphone and the video over to Havilah Imker as they kick off our final Leader Lab of the year. Thank you, Havilah. Everyone, please help me in welcoming them.
Hello. I just realized I forgot I was supposed to be in class right now, so I'm just like a little bit frazzled. So we're gonna do our best today. As the first person, I wanted to start with a quick land acknowledgement. Just that I am speaking from, living on, studying on the land of the Ottawa and Peoria, and I'm a visitor here. It's a very small step, but it's a little bit in the right direction. And secondly, I actually want to take a minute to do a quick meditation exercise as we go into these for myself and for everyone. So just get comfortable where you're sitting, feel that grounding, feel the gravity pushing down, feel your space. Breathe in through the nose, out through the mouth. And as you do that, just let your eyes close or soften your focus. Keep feeling that weight pushing into the floor. Release your shoulders and your face. And breathe in a couple more times. And whenever you're ready, come back. So today I'm talking about fragmentation and integration, which is why I think it's important to start with something like meditation, because it's a very personal kind of potentially traumatic subject. So what is fragmentation? To me, it is that moment when we take a part of ourselves and box it away in a little corner because it's not safe for that time. And that might mean protecting yourself in a traumatic relationship or trying to become someone that your parent wants you to be, or any other reason that your brain and your body say, no, we need to protect you right now. And that's a good thing, right? That is a mechanism that exists to protect your core self and to allow you to keep surviving. The problem is when it becomes something that is the only thing you know. When you are so fragmented that you look at yourself and you're just like, I don't recognize myself. I don't feel comfortable with myself. And the challenge with this is that you know who you are. Like you can feel there's something missing. And so how do we get here? What are the causes? There's so many different causes that can cause us to fragment, which I think is why it's such an important thing for me to talk about. Because there's, again, the authority figures in your life who might make it feel like you need to separate certain parts of yourself. Or there are the institutional ideas of whether that's race, class, gender, that you feel you need to fit into, or other people put those ideas onto you. And then there's your own need to succeed and to feel self-worth in whatever situation you're in at the moment. And there's also something that I've been learning about recently, and I'm not a practitioner, but it's been helpful for me to kind of understand this. And it's called complex PTSD, and it's not the same as PTSD. But it's something that happens when you have reoccurring situations that make you feel unsafe. And it has a similar effect of any kind of fragmentation, where it challenges your ability to connect with other people, whether that's because of distrust or any other reason. It also affects emotional regulation and self worth. And so, this is fragmentation is a really, really challenging thing. I wrote about this last year for a creative nonfiction class. And in there, I talked about something I talked to my mentor about, where I was like, I feel like I don't have anywhere to rest. I am running everywhere trying to find something, and I don't know what it is. And I'm starting to realize that what I've been looking for this whole time was myself. I was just missing little parts of myself, and I could feel that, but I didn't know what it was. And so I want to bring you on a little bit of a journey with me of kind of my own travels from fragmentation to learning how important reintegrating yourself is. So, a little bit of background on me. I was homeschooled, and it was a good educational experience. But it wasn't super great for like the rest of the parts of my life that make me a human being. And I have one younger brother, and so our only social interaction were in churches. And this was typically between people who were like 65 to 85 years old. And as we got older, we started to transition out of those spaces quicker and quicker. And so we would spend 2 years in a church. We would enough time to kind of build those deep relationships and to feel that I had someone who cared about me. And then we would leave again. And so that created in me that need to separate my emotions. It created a lot of distrust in other people. And so those were kind of some external forces going on. And internally, I had internalized a lot of the conservative Christianity I'd grown up in. And so I started spending basically all the time every day praying this like certain prayer that I had written that covered every sin I could think of. And it would be like, oh, I scratched that doorknob, or I meant to scratch someone's hand when I shook it. And it got to the point where I couldn't read, I couldn't have conversations, I couldn't enjoy anything because I just had to do this thing. Um, and then, so that was my internal conflict, right? And then within my own family, which we were very close because we didn't have any sort of external inputs really, I was the peacemaker. And so I was the person there trying to make sure that everyone was happy, and I had to be perfect so I didn't make anyone else scared or sad or angry at me. And so there were so many different things going on that to feel safe in my own head, which I didn't because of my other mental health issues, I had to kind of squirrel away parts of me, the parts that needed to trust people, the parts that wanted to speak my opinion. Um, and I didn't even know that those parts existed because it happened so early on in my life. I just knew that they were missing. And so I survived until I graduated from high school because I was like, this is all I need to do. I need to survive until I'm graduated, and then I can figure out what the real world is like. And as soon as I graduated, I started kind of going on this journey of dealing with all of my trauma because I was like, I don't want to carry this. I'm going to go face every single thing. And so I've spent the past 5 years doing this. I went to gravestones. I've gone to one of the churches where I felt that I had finally built really deep, good relationships, and we left without saying goodbye. We didn't have internet. I didn't have a phone. And so, like, I never had contact with these people again. And so I went back to all of these places, and it would feel good. It would feel like, yeah, I've dealt with this one thing, I can move on. And there was always something new to deal with and to look at. And last year that kind of culminated in confronting my mom about how difficult my childhood had been for me is in an emotional way. And like, I didn't approach it as well as I could have, but we made it through counseling, and I was like, okay, I I dealt with everything. Like, I still don't feel okay. What's going on? And I told my counselor, I'm like, you know what? I just want to, like, I've dealt with everything. I just want to leave it behind. I don't want to carry it anymore. Like, if I just don't have a relationship with my family, that's okay. I don't want to deal with this anymore. And she just looked at me and was like, that's not a healthy response, right? I'm like, yeah, but it's too hard. And that conversation with my therapist, like, really helped me understand how important it was that I am a full person. Shockingly enough, like, everything that I've experienced up until now has made me who I am today. And so I started thinking about, okay, so I need to understand who I was, what were those forces, to then find these things that I need to reintegrate, right? And so I started thinking about even at one of our last self reflections when we were talking about conflict animals. And my animal was the avoidant turtle. And I was like, oh man, I don't know. I don't want to be an avoidant turtle. Tears. And so I started thinking about this in the sense of what does that mean to me as an integrated person, right? And I was like, okay, that makes sense. I don't like conflict because I was in the middle of a lot of it and it wasn't good for me. And then understanding that then helped me see, okay, so when I'm in a situation and I am avoiding conflict and I am angry because I am avoiding conflict, that anger is not toward the situation, it's not toward the person, it's not even toward myself. It simply means that I have learned this as a coping mechanism, and it is the way that I take up space in a conflict. And I can understand that why I do that. And when I understand why I do that, I can then think, okay, maybe this situation isn't as dangerous as my brain is telling me. Maybe I can try putting my actual opinion out there. And so this kind of comes back to three things that I think are necessary for integration. The first is finding people who can create a safe space for you to try reintegrating. What does it look like when the first moment I had as a freshman on campus was breaking down on a dance floor in a 1 credit dance class I took, and the professor just looked me in the eyes, put her hands on my shoulders, and said, "You can do this." And it was so simple, but it meant so much to me because in that moment, I wasn't performing. I wasn't trying to be anyone. I was scared. And normally I won't show that to other people. And so having those people who will support you for who you are now, but also who you might be when you access these other parts of yourself and bring them back in. Um, and the other one is like there does have to be some confrontation of of your past, of things that have hurt you, and this can be super simple. It doesn't have to be big and dramatic. Like every single thing affects us. And I think all of us, I think we all know this. We all need to go to therapy at some point. Like life's hard. It just is. And so doing that kind of confrontation then allows you to think about the things that have been put away as a safety mechanism in a healthy way. So for me, for a long time, and sometimes I still think this, I thought, you know what? I don't know how I can't love other people. Love is just not an emotion I feel. And I'm starting to realize like I just don't have a good relationship with my emotions. And so that's something that I have to consciously build up because I wasn't taught how to healthily interact with my emotions. And it's interesting to think about how when I came to the Cook Leadership Academy, like I was the I won't use absolutes, but I was like one of the quietest people ever. I just didn't say anything. I stood at the back of the room, nothing. And I'm still a quiet person. I didn't become like a loud person, but I'm not a fearful quiet person anymore. I learned the good parts of my quietness and was able to keep that, but in a healthy way. Um, and so I also want to think about what does it look like to reintegrate the good parts of your childhood or your young adulthood. As Parker Palmer says, like in that essay, for those of you who have taken Live 100 or INT 100 now, that vocation and like what your presence in the world means is not an external voice, it's an internal voice. And so learning how to listen to that voice, because when you're a kid, you haven't internalized those things that tell you to be a certain way. You just are. Um, and so thinking about what are those things that were your true self, that core self, before you started putting little parts of yourself away to match what you needed to be to survive? And this can be so many things. For me, now I own like 12 instruments, something like that. And it took me forever to realize I liked music until I looked back and I was like, wait, when I was a kid, that was just a thing I did. I absolutely loved it. And then I completely forgot about it. Um, and so I want to take a couple minutes here. We're going to talk about it more in our small groups. But take like 2 minutes to write down two things that you really enjoyed as a kid that like brought you joy. And then two things that maybe challenged you, created obstacles, that affected how you interact with the world today. I just want you to have those going into that conversation to kind of ground it. So if you want to take like 2 minutes right now, and then I'll wrap up. All right. If you don't have anything, that's fine. You got small group time, you got Q&A time. But just start thinking about that. What are those things that are maybe missing? Um, so to recap, we kind of talked about what fragmentation of the self looks like a little bit and some of those causes. Um, and then what reintegration looks like. And that can look like bringing things back into your life or learning why you react to certain things in a certain way. And I also suggested creating safe spaces, finding those positive people who see you for who you are, not who they want you to be. And also addressing the things that are challenging and not, you don't have to do them all at once. It took me 4 years, 5 years to get to where I am today. Um, and always do it in a safe space, always in a safe space. But this is an important thing because so often we want to be a new person. We want to reinvent ourselves. But you are you and you always bring that core person with you. And while sometimes that can feel like a challenge, it's a beautiful thing to learn who you are as a person in the world and what you bring. And it's really always just an exciting adventure for me. Um, I realize that may not be for everyone, but I just challenge you to think about what does it look like to reintegrate and to start on that journey. And that is my 20 minutes.
Thank you for sharing, Havilah. As someone who was a part of your journey for the past 2 years, I loved hearing kind of the culmination of that process of reintegration. So I turn it over to our audience. Any questions for Havilah? Feel free to use the chat or unmute yourself and pop some questions their way. I see Ashley's hand up.
I like how you used this metaphor of fragmentation and reintegration. Following with that metaphor that you used, what do you think about the idea of reconfiguration, like taking those pieces of your core person as you are, and then like the substance remains the same, but the form that people see might be different. If that might be too like metaphysical, I don't know, but I guess what comes to mind when I elicit that image in your mind.
Yeah, I think that's I feel like again, I don't know, man, but I think this is like the next step, right? So like the first part is just recognizing what what is missing and like what you've blocked out from who you present to the world. And then once you can welcome those things back in, then you can say like, okay, what does this mean to me now? Now that I have all of these pieces, what does it look like putting them back together? It's not going to be like what it was when you were a kid or when you were a teenager. Um, and so I think that's a good like third step of so we have the reintegration. Now what does it look like today? Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, thank you, Lauren. Absolutely. It's been really weird because like I'm a very driven person. And so I'm like, all right, I got these steps. I'm gonna go do them. And so it was like it was a weird experience of like, I don't know if there were the lows, like there are the lows, but it felt like I was always accomplishing something. It was just when I would get to the end of what I thought I needed to do, and I was like, I still feel super empty. Like this didn't do what I wanted it to. And then my reaction was, so there must be something else to do. And it's when I kind of reached the end of those things to do that I was like, maybe I'm looking for something else. But I think that whole journey had to happen to get me here, which is kind of what I'm saying, right? Like everything that happened got you to where you are, and it's just being willing to recognize that. Um, and I mean, and also kind of what Ashley was saying, like I had to reconfigure what I was looking for and recognize like that waiting thing was me. Like that sounds super metaphysical, but it's true. Um, let's see. Sarah. Yeah, absolutely. Those are like some of my favorite movies are those ones where you're like, I love the journey. Like what makes you who you are? Especially as we're in college. We have that chance to think about who do we want to be? Who are we? What is that person that we get to bring into the world? Which is so far beyond like what kind of job are you going to have when you grow up? It's like, what is your presence in the world? What are you going to bring? Like maybe you work in an office space, or maybe, you're working on a farm, or you're an artist, or you're a supervisor somewhere, but you can be good at what you do, but it's that thinking about who are you? Who do you bring to the space that I think is so exciting.
Well, I have a question for you. I think we still have a couple of minutes here.
Yeah.
So one thing that I've kind of grappled with is like, okay, so these things happen that were out of your control, but that sucked, right? And ultimately, you wouldn't be who you are now, and none of us would be who we are now if these crappy things hadn't happened to us, right? But it's not like you're thankful for those things, but it's like they had to happen, or they did happen, and so there's no like questioning that, I guess. So how do you balance that, being like, you're proud of who you are, you're glad that you have made it to where you are and have the perspective you have, but also, as we get into and not for everybody, but get into an age where we're thinking about potentially bringing other life into the world or moving into the next phase of our life as generationally, how do you think about like, still it's not fair that those things happened to somebody, and you want to be a part of making sure they don't happen to other people?
Yeah, exactly. Um, I think that's something that everyone deals with in their own way, and for me that looked like saying what I needed to say. Um, and I didn't know what I was doing, but like I knew I needed to do that, which is like why I went to my grandfather's grave. I was like, I know you're dead, but I have things to say to you. And I said them, and I never went back, and I didn't feel that need to go back, and I didn't harbor that same anger toward him. Because I got to have my piece. Like I wasn't just carrying it around like, oh man, this sucked. Like I got to put my feelings into that same space with what happened. Um, or even like if they were bad experiences of like it was almost more harmful to confront it than to not, I still knew that I had done like I had put myself back out there. And I didn't do it in like a totally naive way, but I I was like, okay, I did that thing. I'm not going to do it again, but I did it. And for me that was good. And I know for other people where they can look at it as a way like, I'm glad it happened this way. Like it's not like you said, it's not like a thankful thing. My brother and I sit down all the time. We're like, we wouldn't be who we are today without it. So like, would we go back and do it again? No, no, but like also we like who we are now. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah, I just wanted to hear your perspective. Thank you.
yeah.
Well, I'm going to steal a spotlight and ask one more question, Havla, before we go into our small groups. So as you have done this process of, kind of coming to terms with your childhood experiences, who you were, who you are, you had mentioned like recognizing your past self, recognizing your future self, recognizing your present self, but then also surrounding you by others who are helping you work towards that future self and like working towards where you want to be. So like you're in this position now at graduation of college where through this reintegration process, like where is your energy going next? What has this reckoning led you to do next?
Yeah. Um, I think it's definitely something because community has been so important and it's been a really, again, a really weird, fun journey of like discovering people who I basically just ran across accidentally. Um, Please ask me about it. I just realized I didn't say anything about it. And now I'm sad. But I think like where my energy is going now is kind of again spending more time in like away from the need to perform in college, and so I'm living on a farm next year, which I'm super happy about. And so that's just kind of a chance to again like be still in my head and not keep waiting and looking and searching and just to rest for a bit. Um, but then I'm really excited because like my life goal is to help people tell their stories and to find that confidence in their own voice and their own presence in the world. So whether that means like working with oral histories or even archives and telling the past stories, um, is what I'm really excited about. And I'm also like so wildly excited to be like, I'm like, can I just be old enough to be a mentor for the CLA, please? I'm pretty sure the people next year won't want me as a mentor, but like also if you want, you know. So I'm excited to like to be that community for other people and to be that person who can look at you and be like, I love you, like how you are now, but also I know you're going to grow and I know you're going to keep becoming someone new every single day. And I'm so excited for that journey. So, yeah, I'm almost crying now.
Well, Havilah, it has been a true pleasure to be a part of this journey and for you to be able to share with us today. So everyone, let's give Havilah, if we can either use our emojis, is that what they are, reactions, or give some hand clapping to show our gratitude for Havilah sharing this story with us. We are going to shift into small groups here. Allie, are we ready to rock with small groups?
Yes, we are.
I knew I could count on you. We're going to go into small groups. We will be back here in the large group at 1:50. So have some time discussing what that childhood integration looks like for you. And we will see you back here in the large group in just over 10 minutes. All right, there's the mass flood back in. Okay, I'm going to ask that y'all turn on your videos quick so I can make sure that we have most people here at our computers before introducing our next guest. Thank you. I know some people probably stepped away from their computer for a minute. I certainly encourage that, but I want to make sure we have everyone ready to engage in our next Leader Lab. So again, I'm going to turn the mic over here to Megan in just a minute, then we'll go into small groups and then we'll have a break. So mentally know that as you engage fully with Megan here, as I'm going to toss the mic over. So I invite Megan O'Neill now to take ownership of the screen and the microphone and get us started with our second Leader Lab of the day.
How did I? Sorry, I just got like a little thing that was like unmute yourself after I already unmuted myself. Okay, I'm gonna try and share my screen, but I'm like, I don't know how Zoom works, so
we will help you through this.
Thank you. Can you see this properly?
Sure can.
Okay, let me try and wait. No, oh my God, sorry. Oh my God. Okay, my bad.
You're good.
Okay, here we go. We're all set. Okay, so thank you, Grace, for introducing me. Also, I'm reading off my phone if you see me doing that. So I'm Megan O'Neill. I am a first-year fellow candidate. I feel like I haven't got the chance to meet so many of you because we're on Zoom and stuff like that. I'm also a senior. I'm graduating at the end of the semester. And I just want to say thank you, first of all, to Havilah for sharing all of that. Obviously, like as on my little PowerPoint thing, I'm going to be talking about liberation theology and sort of Christianity. And I want to be sensitive to the fact that some people do have, like everyone has a different experience with religion and organized religion and that sort of thing. So as I'm talking, I invite you guys to share your own experiences, your comments, your reactions to the things that I'm saying. in the chat and kind of start having that Q&A type conversation. Also, I'm going to be talking primarily about like Christian history, not like theology, if that makes sense. And so the other thing I want to note is that I was not actually raised Christian, and so I can't really speak to that experience. So I invite other people, you know, in the time afterwards to kind of pop in that regard. And so the way that I kind of came to the place where I am now, I don't really know how to say it, is that I'm in the honors college, so I'm doing my honors senior project right now. And I chose to do the more traditional sort of thesis sort of route. And my thesis has been a kind of an unexpectedly transformational sort of process for me. I started out thinking and writing about trade networks in the late Roman Empire. And I'm fascinated by like economics and labor dynamics, and especially the way that we think about these things in historical contexts that are very distant from us now. And I think that exploring the historical relationships between money and power and human behavior, sorry, I'm kind of nervous. It bears some important lessons for us, especially in the United States, which has surpassed the Roman Empire in terms of something called the Gini coefficient, which measures wealth inequality, which was one of the foremost factors in the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. But when I started digging into research in the fall, I was kind of exhausted and overwhelmed with all of this like archaeology and secondary literature that I was working with. And this was earlier in the fall, so the weather was still nice, but like COVID was really high, so I wasn't really leaving the house a lot. So when I would kind of like get overwhelmed, I would go out and sit on my porch with a cup of coffee, and I would read about early Christian monasticism. And then that was the point at which I sort of started to realize, okay, this is what I need to be writing about. This is what I need to be looking into. And so I ended up becoming really captivated by the relationship between these early Christian monastic communities and medicine and charity and sort of Christian notions of charity. And this kind of ties in with my other interests about economy and wealth allocation too, because the development of medical infrastructure that occurred in these communities required, you know, obviously material resources and labor and that sort of thing. And there's actually quite a lot of evidence to kind of look at how these resources were allocated. We have a lot of archaeological proxies and also primary literature. But the organizing principle for these kind of early Christian medical institutions was not profit or efficiency, as is kind of more familiar to us, maybe in the way that the American medical system runs. But it was charity, and it was especially some of the notions from the Gospels. I have the Koine Greek on this side, just in case anyone's wondering. The Bible, the New Testament, was originally in Greek. So this notion of loving your neighbor as yourself, and that being kind of the most important thing. And so it was this radical solidarity with people who are cast out, who are not wealthy, who are kind of on the periphery of society and have no support from other institutional structures. And the people who in Catholic social teaching were told to give preference to and to make a priority in the way that we conduct ourselves in relation to the world and our communities. And so these early Christian monastic communities really struck a chord in me. You know, this seemed to be quite a kind of profound idea that maybe resonates in our words, but not necessarily our actions in kind of contemporary Christianity. And so in particular, I'm really interested in Saint Basil of Caesarea, who was Bishop of Constantinople in the 4th century, and who founded a massive charitable complex on the outskirts of Cappadocia, which is a region in Asia Minor, which is modern-day Turkey. And so Basil was from a wealthy East Roman family, and he trained as a physician in Athens in his youth. He became a practicing lawyer and taught law as well. He had a successful career for someone of his class and status, but Basil had a revelation after encounter with one of the early church fathers. He quit his law career and was baptized, and eventually ascended to the role of Bishop of Caesarea. But one of his most interesting theological contributions, at least to me, is the idea that bishops are doctors of the soul. There was a lot of sort of medical metaphor going on at this point in the Eastern Christian communities, not so much in the West. So he conceived of bishops not as kings or teachers or even shepherds, which is kind of a common metaphor that we're used to, but as tradesmen, as workers, as their job is to care for people who are hurt in some way. And so as Bishop of Constantinople, he also kind of engaged this idea practically. He founded this massive complex on the outskirts of Cappadocia to house and feed and care for people who were disenfranchised and marginalized, and especially poor. And one of the most significant aspects of this complex was that it housed inpatient medical facilities with dedicated wards for surgery, and kept doctors and medically trained monks on staff. And the remains of this complex haven't been discovered or excavated, but there's plenty of literary evidence that attests to the fact that it existed and kind of the scope of the things that it covered. And there were also many similar but smaller institutions like this around the Eastern Mediterranean, again, not so much in the West. And so what I'm focusing on in my thesis is kind of the role of these institutions, and how they functioned during the Justinianic plague from the 6th to the 8th centuries, which occurred kind of cyclically every 6 to 11 years. And so hospitals and Christian support networks are theorized to have increased survival rates during the initial waves of the plague. Christians were purportedly, but probably not actually, the only ones who were taking care of the sick and engaging in organized burial programs. That has a lot to do with the selectivity of the literature that exists on this subject. But according to one of the statistical models that I'm working with in my thesis, 20% of the population of Constantinople, which is about 80,000 people, died within the first 4 months of the plague, just in Constantinople. And so, and a lot of other people kind of fled the city in the midst of this. And so this had a massive impact on the labor market and trade and agriculture and just the ability for these systems to sustain people. And in the countryside, it seems from the archaeological evidence as though entire towns were completely wiped out, like everyone just died. And so this is around the time that we see the rise of cult worship within the Christian church, which still exists in Roman Catholicism and also in Eastern Orthodox Christianity. So worship of the Virgin Mary and also worship of saints and early Christian martyrs. That's where this practice originates, is during this time. And there was also a really heavy strain of apocalypticism and kind of eschatological thinking. And in the years preceding the plague, there had been a ton of seismic activity, so earthquakes and that sort of thing, potentially volcanic eruptions as well, and climatic variations that caused droughts and famines. And then also an invasion by the neighboring Persian Empire. And so even before the plague, people kind of thought that the world was ending, which might resonate a little bit with some of what we're feeling right now. And so that kind of brings up, oh, sorry, I totally forgot to do my slides. My bad. Here's some maps. Enjoy. Okay, why do we study history? Yeah, so this is a question that I've been kind of working with in some of the published working conference sort of presentations that I've been doing for the past couple of years. Is like, what is the point of this? Because I feel like the way that we're taught, especially in like K-12 education, doesn't necessarily teach us about how to engage with history. It just teaches us kind of facts. And so people tend to think that they don't like history very much, when that's usually not the case. And so it's kind of a cliche that we say that we study history so that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past or whatever, but that doesn't seem to be true. That seems actually self-evidently false if you study history on kind of a macro scale. Human history tends to be circuitous. We tend to kind of encounter the same problems over and over, and we react to them in very similar ways every single time. Not the same, but very similar. And so regardless of what we know about the past, this is kind of a pattern that emerges, especially when you look at ancient history kind of extending into the modern age. And so there are biological and neurological reasons, obviously, for why we kind of react the same way to similar stimulus over and over. But that's not really my sort of question. I don't know that much about that. what I'm more interested in is that I do believe, not just in the Christian sense, but I believe in the existence of a human soul. We have the capacity for reason and we have the capacity for love. And those two things I don't think are fully explained by our biology. I might be wrong. But these capacities that we have for reason and love regularly override our biological impulse to survive. And so when the plague hit Constantinople, the Christian community made contact with the sick and the dying, knowing that they would become infected with the plague. It was a bubonic plague, so it was highly infectious through physical contact. And there's plenty of literary evidence on this from religious leadership and also the laity at the time. Also archaeological evidence, which seems to corroborate this. So the obligation that they felt that they needed to care for the sick and the dying overrided their impulse to survive. Here Eusebius says they drew their neighbors to themselves, drawing the sickness from their neighbors and willingly receiving their pains, knowing that they were going to die. And so this is a dedication that we see in many of the frontline workers now, but I think that there's a significant difference is that the people who bear the brunt of the risk right now don't really have a choice to do so. So many of them are doing it out of economic necessity, and they're doing a great thing under very terrible coercive circumstances. So we have to ask ourselves, is this really an act of love? Maybe. I don't think it's mutually exclusive. Or are these people being exploited in some way? Do they also need the sort of healing and liberation that we see in these other sort of sources? So moving on from that, I want to switch over and talk a little bit about Dorothy Day. So I only remember writing one of the essays for my admission to the Cook Leadership Academy, and this was the only one, because I wrote about Dorothy Day for that question of like, who's a leader that you admire? And so Dorothy Day was a journalist and activist in the New York City labor movement. And she founded this thing called the Catholic Workers Movement, and also the publication of the Catholic Workers Movement, which was called the Catholic Worker. And she's written a couple of books about her activism and her religious convictions and that sort of thing. She actually was a convert in her adult life. She kind of lived through her late teens, early 20s as a bohemian and was an anarchist and that sort of thing. And she never really lost that fire. She just kind of channeled it through this new framework of Christian social teaching. And so specifically the newspaper, that was her main thing because she was a journalist, was created to raise attention for underreported issues facing working class communities at the time, specifically labor issues pertaining to women and African Americans. And this was in the 30s and the 40s. So pretty much every other mainstream media outlet and even some of the smaller kind of radical media outlets were ignoring the issues facing people who, were facing multiple different kinds of marginalization. And so the Catholic Worker Movement also provided food and housing and clothing and financial support to people who needed it. And several of these charitable houses still exist throughout the country, but the movement has decreased significantly to the point where it's kind of a non-entity in most communities, because it was targeted kind of through the 60s and 70s, along with other left-wing movements, through the US government's domestic counterintelligence program. And some of you may know that the biggest targets of this program were like the Black Panther Party and a lot of the sort of civil rights activism groups who were systematically dismantled through the US government's efforts. There's plenty of documentation of this. And so now kind of tide has turned a little bit, and there's actually a case open for Dorothy Day's canonization in the Vatican. So pretty soon we might have a Saint Dorothy Day. And so as I mentioned, her sort of guiding force is Catholic social teaching, which is the pragmatic lessons of the Bible that tell us we have an obligation to give freely to those in need and care for the people in our community. And so liberation theology is closely tied to this tradition of Christian charity, stretching all the way back to St. Basil in the earliest days of the Christian church. So let me keep up with my slides. Okay, yeah, so liberation theology arose in part out of the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s, which was called to reassess the relationship between the church and the laity. And Vatican II codified what is referred to as the preferential option for the poor, which essentially means that the church has an obligation to really take seriously this idea of Matthew 25 to, well, mostly 35 to 36. For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me. And so the preferential option for the poor arose primarily out of Latin American Catholicism in the 20th century. And Latin American priests, especially the Jesuits, placed an emphasis on socioeconomic analysis. So they cared for the poor and the marginalized in their communities, in this way, following these pretty specific instructions laid out in the core Christian texts. But they also took it a step further and started asking these questions about, why is there so much poverty here specifically in our communities? What are the systems that perpetuate poverty in certain areas of the world, and who benefits and who bears the consequences of these systems? And for this, they were often persecuted and tortured and killed as communist sympathizers in US Cold War operations in South and Central America. And so you can't fully understand the history of liberation theology in Latin America and throughout the rest of the world without also understanding American intervention in Latin America in the 20th century, which has a lot to do with, the history of the Monroe Doctrine and opposition to social democratic self-governance in formerly colonized states. So the US, financially and militarily, supported and even at times openly conducted regime change in South America, supporting or installing far-right and explicitly fascist leaders in Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Cuba, Chile, Costa Rica, Dominican Republic, El Salvador, Guatemala, Haiti, Nicaragua, Panama, Paraguay, Peru, Uruguay, and Venezuela. And you can see from this infographic that in some of these countries, it's happened multiple times. And so the CIA also has documented ties to cocaine manufacturing and exporting and has financially supported cartels in South and Central America. Hundreds of thousands of civilians, children, and clergy, if not millions, it's difficult to get numbers about these things, have been slaughtered by paramilitary death squads in the process of this regime change, which have not only been financially backed by the US, but also at times trained by US forces. And most of this was done in order to facilitate resource extraction and access to cheap goods and labor. And to this day, minerals, oil, and agricultural produce are exported to the US to the detriment of those countries' environment, their economy, and the welfare of their people. And the most explicit evidence of this is United Fruit Company. I don't know if anyone has ever heard about this, which still exists today as the Chiquita brand of bananas, which everyone is probably familiar with. It still exists. But now they are the subsidiary of a different multinational corporation. And they provide a massive portion of the US banana supply. And throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, United Fruit Company, supported by the US government, operated plantations and regularly massacred workers who were attempting to organize for freedom. And so the instability of this region, which has been caused in part by this repeated political intervention and economic exploitation, is the driving force behind the so-called border crisis, and companies in the US use the H-1B and H-2A visa systems to exploit the precarity of these people for cheap labor. And these are the circumstances that gave rise to liberation theology. Catholics in these countries saw what was going on and took steps to try and address the massive and repugnant injustice that they faced, but it wasn't enough. And many Jesuit priests were tortured and killed under these regimes. And so it's significant that right now we have the first ever South American Pope. Francis is from Argentina and led his congregation through the 1976 coup and the dictatorship of Videla, both of which were openly supported by the US government, with significant support from the US. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, in particular, he is still active in both Democratic and Republican political administrations today. And thousands of people were disappeared and killed during this time, especially Jesuit priests. And so I've just given you a lot of historical information, kind of just dumped a ton of information on you right now. And so this is very dense, but it's also very incomplete. This is hardly even scratching the surface of any of these subjects that I've just touched on. And so if you have any questions about what I've gone through, you can reach out to me, or you can just, kind of do some reading on your own. We have a magnificent library at Grand Valley, and you have access to all of these resources that I have listed here, as well as, anything else you can find. And I know that we all have been taught the research skills to access this information. And so I really encourage you to kind of do this reading and think deeply about these things and explore the resources that you are privileged enough to have at your disposal. This is a privilege that only about 30% of people in the US have, of a higher education. And so as leaders and also as citizens of the richest civilization in documented human history, we have a duty to understand what our country is doing in the rest of the world. And I think, some of our presenters later are going to kind of talk about similar issues. And we have a duty to question what we're told and to think about who bears the cost of our comfortable lifestyle. How were all these systems intertwined, and how are we implicated in some of these things that have happened and continue to happen throughout the world. So, and I've laid out this information not only for that reason, but because it highlights a couple other kind of maybe more existential themes that I want to ask people to think about. So, what is the purpose of religion and spirituality? What really motivates injustice? How do we cope with existential threats? How do we understand ourselves in relation to others? What does it mean to lead? What do we really value? These are all big questions, obviously, very big questions, but they are the questions that history demands of us. History does not give us answers. History doesn't tell us how to avoid the same mistakes. History asks us to think about that. And so if you think that you have an answer right off the top of your head to any of these questions, I want to invite you to kind of reconsider that, because these are not easy and you shouldn't have an answer right off the top of your head. These are things that ought to be considered and thought about and kind of bring us to new conclusions over the course of a lifetime. And so studying history and understanding Christianity, or other belief systems for that matter, or being, what is called in psychoanalysis a good enough leader. This idea that we should not try to be perfect, because we will likely fail in the pursuit of perfection. We just have to be good enough. So to be a good enough leader, this all requires humility. We have to be humble enough to recognize our own fallibility and our shortcomings and our mistakes, and also our interconnectedness with other people, without reproaching ourselves, because self-hatred is not the same thing as humility. Self-hatred is a different kind of narcissism, where all your energy is focused back toward yourself, toward hating yourself. And that's not a good way to live. And so these things also teach us that we are nothing as individuals. We are all so connected to each other. We can't do anything without each other. So just think about how many people, contributed to this right now, what we're doing right here. So people had to build the laptops that we're zooming on and generate power to power our laptops and kind of write the code and stuff like that. How many people did it take to invent the computer as a concept, and then to optimize it to the point that we can use it as we do now? And how many people contributed to the maths and the material science and the philosophy and the linguistics and the graphic design, everything that went into the optimization of the computer? This is the combined force of all of human history that we are sitting at right now. Every moment that we progress forward in time is the combined force of human history. And billions of minds and souls and human lives are all connected every moment of every day in everything we think about and interact with. And we are never just ourselves. So regardless of whether or not you believe in a higher power, you can't deny the profound beauty of human history, how tangled and terrible and beautiful our past is. That is a really humbling thing. And so I realize that I've gone on for a really long time now. And so I want to hear what you guys have to say, and I hope that I've left you with many more questions than answers. And so I want to close with a little poem by John Donne, the 16th century Christian metaphysical poet. So, no man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less, as well as if a promontory were, as well as any manner of thy friends or of thine own. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind. and therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. Okay, I'm gonna try to stop sharing my screen now. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Oh gosh. Okay, so I'm trying to get through.
Megan, first of all, thank you so much. As a non-classicist, I really appreciate that approach. And I think we don't necessarily talk about that very often within CLA. And so I love your history lesson. And I really loved, I mean, that poem kind of floored me at the end there. So I really appreciate that. It seems like we already have a lot of questions coming in. Many people are tripling and quadrupling Sarah's request for you to be a professor at GV. So you have our vote, Megan.
Yeah, if anyone can use some nepotism to get me in there, I'd appreciate that very much.
But Megan, it looks like Ashley has a question here. Do you mind me asking it to you?
Yeah, go ahead.
So in your opinion, what's the link between the plagues you spoke about and the rise of the veneration of saints? Sorry.
Yeah, so from what I understand, basically there's this theory that after the plagues and kind of all of the other instability that was occurring in that period, there was this kind of desperation for meaning, because when you watch, like I said, 20% of the people around you not only die, but this is a bubonic plague. And so a part of the stage of that disease is necrosis. So it's the rotting of human flesh while it's still alive. And if you watch that happen to people around you, kind of everything that you believe about yourself and the world and God kind of starts to fall apart. And so I think that part of the reason behind the veneration of the saints is that there's this frantic search for meaning and search for identity in the midst of a disaster like this. And so then that continues on also because the people who do make it through something like this, they go on to have children. Even in the midst of disaster, people keep living. And so then they pass that on to their ancestors. And then here we are, and we still kind of continue with these practices because on some level, people believe that they work, that they do mean something. So I don't know if that answers your question, Ashley, but.
Yeah, thank you. Because I was like, what's the connection?
I actually have a comment. I'll just tell you 3 quick things. First of all, thank you for actually doing that. And I was very impressed. And then the second thing is, I think it was George Hegel that says, like, we learn from history that we never learned from history. So it's like the other. And then the third is, so remember at the end of the year, like last year, we were supposed to do a survey on CLA and how we felt about this whole program. And so I did have a one-on-one with Grace, and I was telling her, I was like, there's so many different perspectives and theories, and why aren't we talking about hard topics like this? And if CLA is the purpose where we have to talk about things like this, because whether you're a theist or not, or a deist or a nihilist, or like whether you have a religion or not, we're all talking the same, we use the same terminology, like social justice, inclusivity, diversity, love, all of these things. So whether you're religious or non-religious, or whatever it is, we're all using the same terms, and we're all trying to make the social movement to fight for social justice. And I'm like, how is this working? Because everyone's at it with all these different worldviews. So our fight is not about, it's actually beyond sexism, classism, racism, and all of these things because of all these worldviews, right? And then, especially in the US context too, like right now we're like, because of like when we're allies for LGBTQ plus communities, it's like, okay, but like the world outside of the US, there are a lot of still homogenous countries that have these, hierarchical views, which the democracies and systems are like built with. Some are still under monarchies, like some countries are anarchies, some are trying to be democratized, but it's, they're in transitions, and at the same time, our world is completely and really rapidly moving because we're also connected on the digital platform. So it's like, it's actually a bigger fight. If we're really fighting for humanity, we really have to put our biases down and like to reflect and like rediscover where we're at. So I actually, so like while you were talking, I was like, I am in Grace. I was like, did you force her to do this? Because like that was like my biggest critique for CLA. I was like, we need to be having these harder conversations. And it's beyond the political rhetoric of just Republican Democratic, because in between there's all these different independent beliefs. So kudos to you. Very like it was good. So thank
Well,
you.
thank you so much. And yeah, thank you for saying all of that. I definitely think that, you know, in America specifically, we have these very circumscribed views about how politics work, about, you know, political divisiveness, and also our conceptions of race and class and gender are all tainted by our own history. And sometimes, you know, we're not really taught about the rest of the world. And so the way that we engage with these issues on a global scale is very much with the US sort of prejudices in mind. So I definitely agree with that. Let's see. I saw another question come up. So JP said, what is your take on the cycle of civilizations? Do you believe that we're at the end of our run? Damn, okay. Thank you for that. That's a great question. I like the way that you phrased it, cycle of civilizations, because that's how kind of I've learned to think about civilizations through my classics degree. And I don't know, honestly. I think that we're living at a very precarious time. But I also like to keep in mind that, you know, we are a very comparable sort of civilizational and imperial force to Rome in the way that America engages domestically and also internationally. And so the way that I like to think of it is that, you know, Rome was declining and falling for several hundred years. And we are a very young country, kind of on an international scale, very young. And I think that we can't underestimate, like what Yoram was saying, the kind of force of the internet in all of this, and how that tends to accelerate things, and things move very quickly nowadays. So that's kind of my cop-out way of saying that I have no idea. It's anyone's guess, to be honest, but I think that we should be aware that nothing lasts forever. And the more you try and scramble to hold on and preserve something in its current state, the more it will slip away, historically speaking.
Do we have time for
Says,
another question?
oh, sorry, am I talking over someone?
Go ahead, Marlena.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, I just had a question. So I'm assuming that in your Strengths Finder, context is one of your strengths, hopefully. If not, you can correct me.
Yes, it is.
But kind of like reiterating what you were saying in the beginning, how history is not factual, it's just a retelling of events. How do you kind of navigate that ambiguity when utilizing context as a leadership or just like a strength in general? Because I'm in the same boat, like I get all of my understanding from the past, but I literally in my classes this year just learned that like history is not what you expect it is. And so it kind of like, I'm like, oh, okay, like I have to redo everything now in my brain. But yeah, what is your thoughts on that?
So I think you're definitely right, is that, you know, history is not static, history is also not factual. When we're talking about historical fact, that's kind of a term that is tricky to use. It's kind of not real, let me put it that way, because, you know, like one of my issues, because I study classics, I study things that happened, you know, several thousand years ago, and things aren't preserved for that long, so we're missing probably like the majority of records from classical civilization. And so I guess part of the solution for that problem, when we're talking about like history as a discipline, is that you need to be very intimately aware of the fact that you're never going to be right. It's just simply not possible. And so it's always that concept, like I said, it's good enough. And you always need to be kind of reading and listening to other people, waiting for new evidence to be introduced and new frameworks to rise up and new ways of interpreting things, and kind of be in a perpetual state of change in that regard. And I think that does translate well to leadership, is that if we think we're right, we're wrong, you know? Because like the one thing that we should never do as leaders is kind of like I was saying, try and be like an isolated island all within ourselves and think that we know what's best, we know the right way, the right approach, or we know what other people want or what's good for people. So I guess, yeah, I would say that's that's my take in kind of incorporating that context, is to always be curious and to always be learning. I think that's really the gift of a liberal arts education. I think I saw one more thing in the chat, but I know that we're kind of short on time, so go ahead and cut me off if we need to, Grace.
I think the chat was, I mean, feel free to read Ash's comment if you'd like before we move on.
Okay, so Ash says, the quote from John Donne was great. I was thinking of that poem a few minutes before you got to it and was so happy to see it. Oh, that's great. It really captures the heart of this talk. Thank you. I'm glad that was good. I actually, just like a really quick comment before we go, I actually, like as a classics major, I found that poem. I mean, I've read Donne before, but I found that poem when I was preparing this because I was looking for a quote that I thought was from Seneca. You know, that idea that no man is an island, that's often attributed to Seneca. And I've like read Seneca, I studied this stuff, and I didn't realize that it was a misattribution, and Seneca never said that. So just fun fact.
That is a fun fact. So out of how wonderful this large group conversation has been, we're actually going to skip our next small group and go right into a break, everyone. So we will do the warping to small groups, so that if anyone wants to have some processing time, you can have that. But I'm going to ask if you are able to step away from your computer, step outside. Megan, what a fantastic second leader lab. I felt like it was the great second step from Havila, and we're really excited for our next two. So everyone, we will be coming back right at 2:40. So we're gonna put you in small groups, but you don't need to actually be in small group unless that's what you want to be doing. But we are going to take a break here for the next 10 minutes and then dive back in for the rest of our learning together. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Havila. Looking forward to our next two. Welcome back, everyone. If we could all turn cameras on again, that would be helpful, as I can know who else is still stepping back at to their computers, so that we can be sure we have as much audience as possible. Before kicking it off to Michael, I personally stepped outside and did a quick sun salutation, saw the sunshine, got my body moving. Hope you all got snacks, did what you need to check back in for this afternoon together. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to having Michael present here. I'll stall for just one more minute, as I know people are stepping back to their screens. Want to make sure we get the full scope of Michael's presentation. Again, we have two more presentations. We're going to try to power through and not necessarily take a break between these two. We will have a small group between them. So mentally know that and do what you need to do to focus, and then we'll all have a beautiful weekend, hopefully. See, it might even get up to 60s. That sounds beautiful and lovely. All right, so I'm seeing a lot of videos on. Michael, I would love to invite you to take over with the screen and the microphone. Everybody, please welcome Michael as he gives our third Leader Lab for the day.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm really excited to give this talk. So my presentation is on questioning authority. And this has been a topic that I've struggled with for a long time. And I think I recently just found my voice and being able to do this. So if you know me, I love to tell stories, and that's the way I like to teach things. So I'm going to take you guys back to 8-year-old Michael. So for the longest, so actually we'll go back to birth. So on my birth certificate, my name is spelled Micheal. That's how we spell it in Nigeria, which is the country that I'm from. It's a very subtle difference, just 2 letters switched, but we spell it Micheal. And in second grade, my teacher, she came up to me and she said, "Why are you spelling your name wrong?" I was like, "What are you talking about?" She's like, you've been spelling your name wrong." And I couldn't understand what she was talking about because for the life of me, my name was spelled Michael. And so um, she told me, "Yeah, you're spelling your name wrong. I don't know, like this was a bad habit you probably like developed in first grade, and we're gonna like break it. So I'm gonna teach you how to spell your name right." And so I don't think she meant anything malicious by this, but at that moment, I didn't really have the let's say I didn't have the full recognition of what she was telling me and like the impact that that would have. Um, Nor did I really have the, I guess, the courage to say anything because it was instilled in me from a young age that like whatever your teacher says is right, and don't fight from the teacher or don't fight with your teacher. Um, and so I just went along with it because she's the authority figure and she must be correct, right? If she says my name is spelled Michael, that's how it's spelled, right? And it wasn't until much later that I was talking to my parents and like they looked over a paper I was writing on and they're like, "Why are you spelling your name like that?" And I was like, "What do you mean? This is how my name's spelled." It's like, "What are you talking about?" They're like, "No, you like when did you start spelling your name that way?" I was like, "Oh, so now you guys want to tell me how my name's spelled." Okay. So yeah, it was just that lack of communication and my inability to question authority that kind of led me into spelling my name the way I spell it now. And I still spell it to this day, Michael, but that's for other people's sake, um, just because it's more convenient and I'd be getting my name spelled wrong all the time. And I think even if like she was wrong in that aspect, I think she was right in the fact that like from a cultural perspective, it would be easier to just spell your name the way that everybody spells it here. But yeah, that was my first, I guess, experience with questioning authority. And so it kind of set me on this path of finding out when should we listen to the voices of authority and when should we take a step back and question them. Um, so there's two components to authority. There's power and then there's legitimacy. So power is the ability of the authority figure to influence you, whether it be financial means or that maybe they're just a really charismatic speaker or whatever it may be. And then there's legitimacy. So legitimacy is you or whoever the authority figure represents um, saying, yes, we recognize your authority as a leader. And so if you're missing any of these components, that authority cannot exist. And so she definitely had the power as my teacher. But had I used my power, or had I used my influence of legitimacy, I would have been able to say, actually, this is not your place to tell me how my name is spelled. That's something that was determined by my parents, right? That's the authority figure that really has this power. And so I kind of want to digress a little bit and get into a philosophical state of mind. So William Shakespeare, he wrote in Romeo and Juliet, he said, "What's in a name? A rose by any other name would smell just as sweet," right? And beautiful words, certainly. Because it gets to like the idea that names are superficial and the essence is what really matters, that which penetrates the skin. But I think he missed something in that names can really have a profound ability to tell you so much about a person. I was actually named after my grandfather, and a little bit about him. He was born into a wealthy family because my great grandfather was I guess a kind of king of sorts. So he owned a lot of land, and he generated profit off that land through slave use, right? And so Excuse me. And so my grandfather didn't agree with that. So when he turned, I think like 20 or 21, he kind of renounced his name and he said, like, if this is how you want to live, like I can't ethically, I can't support this lifestyle. And so he left the family. And because of that, he became a poor farmer. Because that was the only work he could find. And so his decision to question his father's authority directly impacted his lifestyle, and that impacted my father's lifestyle because my father grew up with 8 siblings, very poor, and so that actually impacted me. And so to answer Shakespeare's question, what's in a name? Everything. Yeah, and then so I kind of started thinking about this on a broader scale, right? Like, okay, because I was comparing myself to because I'm fully African. I was comparing myself to other Africans in the diaspora, whether it be in the Caribbean or African Americans, right? And I was like, well, Africans haven't really kind of, in terms of like our history, we've been able to maintain that. But then I even started to think about like how much of our history had been kind of tainted or taken away from us just by the process of colonialism. So I want to take you guys through a short mental activity. So imagine you're sitting in your house just chilling, watching whatever you like to watch, and somebody busts in your door and they say, okay, here's the deal, we're taking over. You are delegated to this one room. You are going to speak this language. You are going to teach these subjects. You are going to believe in this religion. And that's just in your house, right? Now imagine a continent of 54 countries being told that, right? That's the gravitas that authority has. And it influences us in so many ways, even to this day. Like, for example, we have artificial borders now, right? This is a very Western concept that Africans didn't really understand before colonialism. Like, what borders? What are borders? We're all citizens of the world, right? So things like that. And then now, even looking at contemporary contemporary modern events, we see that there's a lot of poverty in Africa, and we ask why. What's like the source of all this poverty? And the way that the media shapes it, a lot of the times is like, oh, they're just developing, or they don't work as hard, or they don't have the resources, or they're not as smart, or whatever it may be, right? And like, think about this. That's like me giving you a map that I drew and expecting you to navigate it, and then blaming you when you sink the ship, right? Because the systems that we have in Africa were handed to us by the Europeans, and so they don't resonate with our way of life, with our perspectives on things. And so that's why I feel like we have so much corruption, so much poverty, so much violence where we do, and we're still trying to navigate those things. But yeah, I think had we been able to question authority a little bit more, we would have been all the better off for it, right? And so with that, I kind of want to transition now into creative writing, a piece that I wrote. I'm not the best narrator. I kind of wish that we could have Morgan Freeman read it for me. I don't know if we have the budget for that, Grace. Well, yeah, I'll try my best. So please bear with me. Let's see. Oof. It seems I have to quit in order to share my screen for some reason. So like, yeah, I don't know why.
Michael, are you able to quick send it to me in the chat or on Google and I could share my screen? Or
Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, yeah. Okay, it should be in your email. Okay, and then could you zoom in, Grace? Thank you so much. Oop. Oh, I don't know why, but the title didn't transfer all the way. So the actual piece is called Loyal to a Fault. So I hope you guys enjoy it. So there was once a prince who was the descendant of an ancient and well-known dynasty. His father was advancing in age, and the prince knew that his time as ruler was fast approaching. However, he had dreams he wanted to manifest before taking mantle of the throne. Therefore, without contemplation, he left the protection of his country and set out alone to see the world. Worried about thieves, he pawned his family jewels, not knowing their worth, to a group of mercenaries who promised him protection in exchange for payment. One day, acting on a whim, he decided to ask the expertise of an appraiser to determine the price of the gems. Upon learning of their great value, he rushed to the mercenaries to resolve all ties with them, hoping that they would return the jewels. He pleaded and pleaded, but to no avail. The mercenaries were like stones before him. The terms of the deal had already been made, and they were unwilling to reconsider. They would keep the gems, irrespective of whether the prince continued to employ their services. Irritated and defeated, the young prince decided to steal back the jewels. He snuck into the mercenary camp in the dead of night and tiptoed his way to the tent where they stored all their treasure. He succeeded in locating his jewels, but just as he was about to make his grand exit, he tripped over a small chest box and fell. The clanging of the metal in the treasure tent caused a great commotion and alerted the mercenaries. The mercenaries rushed over to the tent and apprehended the young prince, binding his hands and feet with rope. They deliberated amongst themselves about what to do with him. The consensus was to kill him. Some wanted to watch him hang, others wanted to feed him to the dogs. However, the oldest mercenary, in his wisdom, proposed a different solution. He told the prince that though the initial agreement that he had made with them was now void, there was still a debt owed on the prince's part for trying to steal back what the mercenaries rightfully earned. Thus, the mercenaries would spare his life if he became their servant, waiting upon them and tending to their needs. As a byproduct of this pact, he would be afforded the protection that he initially sought from the group for the rest of his life. Weighing his options, the boy reluctantly agreed. He figured that a life spent in servitude would be better than no life at all. Ironically, he ended up losing both his family heirlooms and his freedom. For this reason, the expression remains proven: there is no honor among thieves. And then, so that was the short story. And then I wrote a little reflection on that as well. So in ages past, when the common man did not have the opportunity for formal learning, social institutions served a benevolent purpose as mentors and guides of the masses, especially during decision-making. As technology advanced and accessibility to knowledge increased, one would imagine that the role of these agents of socialization would decrease, thereby giving way to the ascent of the individual. However, the opposite outcome occurred. The role of these social institutions increased exponentially, becoming something to the effect of an authoritarian regime. How is it possible that as access to knowledge progresses, man regresses to a more primitive, pitiful state? How can it be that the domineering influence of social institutions intensifies in an age of free thinkers? Free being the operative word, for life has shown countless times, libertas non est gratis, which means in Latin, freedom is not free. What a paradox of a puzzling reality in which the world is a stage and life a satire. We witness all too often the mindless conduct of this maddening age, accredited mostly to the benefactors of humanity. In layman terms, these benefactors are the social institutions which we thoughtlessly support as allies and defend as apologists. Derived from a social construct, there now exists a mandate of allegiance and patronage towards these benefactors. And while the manifestation of the action may be different, the fundamental principle is ageless. Aligning oneself with the entire platform of a political party, voting uncritically, even if one disagrees with some of the party's views on certain issues, attending the same place of worship as one's predecessors, or ascribing to the same faith with no reason other than for the sake of maintaining tradition. Accepting the ideals of patriotism and nationalism as personal values, regardless of how a nation treats its citizens, especially the marginalized. Allowing oneself to be indoctrinated into a social movement that claims to champion social freedom, all the while sacrificing personal freedom and self-expression to endorse the values of the group. We are too well acquainted with these illogical courses of conduct as they have permeated every crack, crevice, and corner of daily life, but we fail to recognize them as being somewhat peculiar due to how commonplace they have become in society. Actions such as these are all socially ordered directives that foster a sense of groupthink. Consequently, seizing the role of the star of the show, the group, the collective, the whole, is brought center stage in all its majesty for the world to see. Meanwhile, the individual, the I, the self, is pushed back and demoted to the less desirable position of an understudy. Ultimately, the individual is stuck with the task of operating as a curtain manager in the stage crew. It is a regrettable situation in which the potential of the individual remains just that, potential. We accept our place behind society, allowing these agents of socialization to cut in line for a role which we duly deserve. Granted, these agents perform an invaluable service to us. They provide the framework for a productive and connected society, but to elevate them to the level of deities is excessive and impulsive, to say the least. Likewise, if they provide this framework for society, is it not more appropriate that they then direct the stage crew, working behind the scenes to guarantee that the play runs smoothly for the individual? But as it were, loyalty currently no longer bears the denotation which it was originally bestowed. As society became more demanding, the meaning of loyalty evolved to selling one's soul and sacrificing one's intellect without question, hesitation, or remorse. It is an irreversible trade of goods of unequal value, allowed to transpire only because of our neglect to read the fine print. It is the greatest tragedy to ever befall human history, the crucifixion of the human spirit. It is a death sentence in which we actively participate, bring upon ourselves, and celebrate once the deed is done. The whole debacle unfolds from within as we simultaneously undertake the responsibilities of judge, jury, and defendant. Yet, evidently, there is no need for a trial of witnesses, for notwithstanding outside testimony, the verdict will always be self-condemnation. And so it is that these social institutions maintain their position over humanity under the guise of loyalty. They are unrelenting in collecting a debt for which they feel they are owed. That debt being the role they held in the past as distributors of knowledge, thereby enabling the development of the rationale. Thus, they manipulate and exploit the human inclination towards gratitude and recompense. They perverse a pretense of loyalty and make it an obligatory element of our repayment. And we who subscribe to the sense of duty that obliges paying one's dues are none the wiser. Still, I wonder, who is that firstborn heir that yielded them that right to think, speak, and act on our behalf? Which half-witted buffoon eloped in the middle of the night and made the executive decision to open Pandora's box, resultantly damning the rest of us? Who was the foolish prince who sold the family keepsakes to mercenaries without first determining their value? Which love potion these agents of socialization secure from Puck and slip into our drink to dupe us into relinquishing such magnificent power? What honeyed words did they speak to seduce the lotus eaters into bequeathing them that mystical flower of psychosis? No, the indoctrination began before we even reached the age to be conscious of it. As infants, these agents managed a heist of the grandest scale, stealing us from our cribs and assuming the role of our caretakers. They fed us lies and convinced us that we were children of humble origins. They left us ignorant of our nobility and stripped us of our birthright to sovereignty. We unknowingly drank the Kool-Aid, given us to quench our thirst, ignorant of the poison because of the sweet, potent taste that concealed it. Likewise, we now encourage future generations to also drink from the sewage, which we call the community water well, so that they too might live and be nourished. This self-propagating chain of self-denial for the sake of the group serves as both the base and pinnacle of human misery, the lamentation of all lamentations. In short, autonomy dies while giving birth to loyalty. The labor pains were too great and the energy expended too costly. The agents of socialization did everything in their power as doctors to save her, but they ultimately chose the life of the child over the life of the mother. The bells toll, heralding her death, born before her time and gone far too soon. We failed to acknowledge and appreciate her in life, but now in death, we all attend her funeral, arguing amongst ourselves over who loved her most. The procession is a somber one, as Ave Maria is sung by the great assembly of well-wishers and onlookers. We take a final glance as her casket is lowered into the abyss. After venerating her tombstone with roses, we silently take our leave for our homes. Her memory will be etched into our very hearts, and her life will be commemorated for years to come. But regrettably, there will be no revival. She will remain in a state of eternal captivity, a requirement of the debt that must be paid. Requiescat in pace, amica mea, requiescat in pace, which means in Latin, rest in peace, my love, rest in peace. So with that, I want to leave you guys with the quotes. So, or I guess 2 quotes. The first quote, a society in which children are not allowed to question adults will become a society in which citizens are not allowed to question leaders. Okay. And the second quote is that the truth is never afraid of questions. Thank you so much for going on this journey with me.
Wow, Michael. First, I really appreciate, I think anytime that there is creative writing shared, I feel really honored. And so I feel really grateful for that entire Leader Lab, but especially you being so honest and vulnerable with us and sharing that piece of creative writing. That was really powerful to me personally. I open up the floor for questions, comments from the group. I'm seeing a lot of kudos coming through. So Michael, I think I'm not alone in my appreciation for that presentation. I think we all might need a minute to process too, in truth.
I guess I'm curious if you could elaborate a little bit about the sort of relationship in the second piece that you're talking about between kind of the individual and society. I guess that's a dichotomy that I'm very interested in. So I'd be interested to hear how you kind of conceive of that.
Yeah, for sure. So I actually think it relates a lot to what you discussed too earlier. So like the idea that we're not in this alone, like we all depend on one another, right? And so I think you approached it from a very positive perspective. And my take on it was from like the negative perspective, when it's taken too far, when we start to lose our sense of self to better the group. And certainly they're like promoting the common good. It's what allows all of us to survive and thrive. But at the end of the day, you came into this world alone and you're going to leave it alone, right? So you must make sure that whatever you do in this life also benefits you and it's true to who you are as an individual.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments, things that we want to know more from Michael? Looks like Lauren has her hand up.
I know this has already kind of gone on in the chat, but I wanted to just say thank you. When you started, I was like, oh, my name means nothing to me. This is not going to resonate at all. I don't know. So I just But now I'm sitting here and I'm reflecting on everything and I'm like almost speechless. And I feel like all of us are just kind of sitting here like trying to absorb it and understand it. So I just wanted to extend my appreciation and know that my silence was not lack of interest, but now it's overwhelming interest and just introspection and thoughts that I can't even put together now. So I just wanted to really say thank you. Like Grace said, being so vulnerable. I panic during peer reviews when people read my writing. So to do that is just incredible. And I really, really, really appreciated that.
Thank you.
I was just curious. So from your writing, I got that your connection with like questioning authority was kind of questioning the blind allegiance to the political parties. And so I was wondering if you could touch more on like your personal experience getting to that point of realization. And yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So I've seen that a lot. And it happens everywhere. It's not just the United States. I mean, I think it's especially pronounced here, but so many countries, like you've just followed the party that you're most aligns with your religion or that your parents supported, right? And so my thing is, I don't care what your party is. I care what your ideas are, right? So I vote by idea. Um, and I try to take a step back and see, okay, what party, you can call yourself whatever you want, right? But like what party is making the or has the platform or has the agendas that are going to better us as people and as a society? What party respects human life? What party um, cares about, like I said in the piece, the most marginalized of us, right? Those are the things that matter to me.
As a follow-up question, if I can jump in, maybe
Mhm.
this is getting a little too, uh, I don't know, but do you, and you don't have to go into detail, but do you believe that there is a capability of political parties to truly honor human life?
Could you clarify your question?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, so, your comment, you're talking about you care about ideas and I mean, I think that's admirable, caring about ideas over, partisan lines and which party is going to, better people and
Mhm.
better, especially those who are the most marginalized. And I guess my question, this is a conversation I have with my brother a lot, who I think someday you two should talk, but, can a political party truly care about human life the way that like I can care about your life and you can care about my life?
Yep. So yeah, I understand your question now. So that gets into perspective, right? It's how does a party um view like what's priority to the party? Is it the success of the party or is it the success of the individuals that make up the party, right? So we often talk about like, oh, the Democrats won this, the Republicans won this. We don't talk about like, oh, this citizen just got a new tax credit to start a business, right? Things like that. And so if I had my way, and this might be radical, but I'd do away with political parties and we just vote by the issue. I don't think America's ready for that, but that's how I would do things because at the end of the day, we're supporting these parties because of what they will, how they'll better our lives, right? But why not skip the middleman and just get on with the issues that really matter to us, right? Rather than doing all these theatrics, I want to say.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right, well, I am going to let us go into small groups here. I think that we could probably talk with Michael on this for quite a while, and maybe in small group, it's really just sitting with this for a little bit longer. If conversation doesn't seem like what the group needs, and if you want some private reflection, I certainly encourage that as well. But we are going to go into small groups here for the next 10 minutes, and then we'll come back. So it's actually only going to be 8 minutes, just so you all know. I want to make sure that we have enough time for Fresh Does to wrap us up. Michael, thank you so much. I can't express my gratitude enough. And everyone enjoy kind of processing these past two presentations and as we get ready for our last. Thank you all. Enjoy small groups. Here we go. There's the mass re-entering. All right. We have one last leader lab this afternoon, and then we're going to finish up in small groups again. So I am going to share my screen, unless Freshta, do you want to say anything before I start the video?
I don't. I'm all set.
All right. Can't wait for you to join us for Q&A afterwards. So everyone, please tune in here for our final leader lab with Freshta Tory-John. Are y'all seeing it? Should be a black screen right now. Yeah. Okay. Not hearing the sound,
We
Grace.
can't hear it. Yeah.
Thank you. Here we go. Now it should be rocking and rolling.
Thank you for the wonderful introduction.
Good.
Before I dive in, I would like to begin with a short little game. For most of you familiar with pop culture, it's called Put a Finger Up. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, I will display a list of descriptions, and if this applies to you, you put a finger up. So here we go. Put a finger up if you were taught that Afghanistan is in the Middle East. Put a finger up if you were taught that Afghanistan's national language is Arabic. Put a finger up if you were taught that Afghanistan is a desert with camels roaming around. Put a finger up if you were taught that Afghanistan is an all-extremist Muslim country. Put a finger up if you were taught that Afghanistan is the birthplace of terrorism. Hopefully, you didn't have too many fingers up because these were all big misconceptions about Afghanistan. And if you did have them all up, then I hope that this can be a moment of education to take with you. Now let's reveal the answers. The Middle East does not exist. It was a term placed by the British in the 1800s and stuck around since. The Middle East actually refers to West Asia. Afghanistan, in fact, is in Central Asia, and within Asia, we are often referred to as Qalb-e Asya, meaning the heart of Asia. Afghanistan is a multilingual nation and has 2 different national languages, and we will explore why this is shortly. Afghanistan actually gets all 4 seasons, and if you're from Michigan or Colorado, then you might be very familiar with some of the snowstorms we get. And to add to that, we don't have camels, but you will see a lot of sheep, donkeys, and horses everywhere. Afghanistan is mostly Muslim, but it does consist of other religions as well, like Baha'i, Hinduism, Judaism, and more. And lastly, Afghanistan is not the birthplace of terrorism. And the answers to it are very debatable, but the majority of terrorism is sponsored by neighboring countries. About 6 years ago, my first time in the United States, I came to discover these misconceptions firsthand. I knew the world held many misconceptions about Afghanistan, but getting to hear some of them in person were indeed surprising, especially coming from a country whose education system is ranked one of the highest in the world. When you first saw me, you might have been confused by my appearance, because as I have been told, I do not resemble the typical Afghan you may have grown to know in media. One of the biggest reasons is because the media frequently highlights the terrorist and majority ethnic groups, relating their appearance to what a normal Afghan might look like. What I hope to bring to the table, as I mentioned earlier, is some educational points. One of the biggest facts most of the world doesn't know about Afghanistan is that we are very diverse, because Afghanistan, being located in Central Asia, served as a hub for many trade routes in history. The Afghan constitution currently recognizes 14 different ethnic groups. And according to World Population Review, Afghanistan has 40 minor languages with 200 dialects, in addition to the official Pashto and Dari languages. Afghanistan's ethnic diversity, or more of an ethnic hierarchy really, is dominated by the Pashtuns and Tajiks, and the rest of the population consists of Hazara, Uzbeks, Almaq, and the rest of the smaller ethnic groups as provided on the slide. And in case you were curious, here are some examples of the people of Afghanistan. From the pictures on the slide, I will let you guess my ethnic background. I will give you a hint. It's from the 3 popular ethnic groups, Pashtun, Tajik, and Hazara. For those of you who guessed Hazara, congratulations! You just aced the pop quiz. Today, I will be sharing something I have never slipped out of my mouth all 21 years of my life. I am Hazara, and I am an overcomer. Today is the first time I have ever announced that I am proud of being a Hazara woman. It has taken me a hard 21 years of living a long journey of breaking many boundaries, fighting through many storms, and smiling through countless death threats to spread awareness about one of the most unknown and darkest nightmares of the world, of my country, the Hazara genocide. The world has been consumed by the international world's efforts of combating the war on terror, but little does the world know that the Afghan state itself is carrying a war on one of its most native ethnic groups. There are charges and consequences for committing a crime, but what happens when your only crime is that your own state wants to eliminate your whole population because they find you biologically inferior, a disgrace to Islam simply because you have Mongolian features, your ethnic group believes in the Shia sect of Islam, and you are more politically and ideologically progressive, especially when it comes to gender roles in education. Hazaras have faced genocidal campaigns, slavery, and land disposition since the 1800s. According to Minority Rights, Hazara once made up 67% of the total population, but now serves under 9% because of these frequent racial massacres. When I was in 4th grade, Hazarajat, the only region now left with predominantly Hazaras, was attacked. Families were kidnapped, shot, and slaughtered in blindfolds, and their bodies were dumped in the ditches on the mountainside and even on the sides of the roads. But all the government did was have a mass burial and go on with their day just like they have been with women's rights. To this day, Hazara discrimination and slaughtering happens everywhere in the hands of Pashtuns and Tajiks. And I even remember watching my own classmates chant and cheer to these slaughterings as the numbers went up on the news. And if being persecuted by your own people is not enough, imagine being the target of your neighboring countries like Pakistan, in addition to Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and the biggest terrorist network, ISIS. So as you could predict, my childhood was very eventful. My earliest memory is the burn on my cheek from my sister's very painful slap. As a little girl, I was very curious, which still hasn't changed much to this day. As most kids do, I loved stars. I loved how they would sparkle and spread across the sky. But this one specific night, my family was running back and forth and taking things into the house from the yard, and my aunts and cousins and uncles were running into our basement, and I just didn't understand what was going on. My oldest sister kept placing me, like a doll, in a corner of the house to not be run over, and she kept telling me to stay there and don't move. But of course, the stars were calling my name. I kept going back outside because I could not have enough of these stars. I mean, I had never seen stars move so fast. And on top of that, make these loud, exciting sounds. So of course I went back out. Whoa, I went and slapped. My sister took me back inside, and I was crying so hard. My face was burning, and most importantly, I couldn't see the stars anymore. But as I got older, I learned that they were not stars, but bullets and rockets. My family was running into the basement with diesel lights because if the Taliban saw any light or signs of living in the rooms above, we were most likely to be the next target in the midst of their battle with the police forces. Later in my childhood, my family moved from Herat, the province I was born in that borders Iran, to the capital, Kabul. And unfortunately, I don't have many pictures from my childhood or any time before that, because if the Taliban cut my parents with anything that was Western, with a writing on it, or had any signs of rebellion and threat towards them, you were gone and never heard of, like some of my uncles. Life in Kabul was one of many memories and experiences that shaped me into the person I am today. As most families in the country do, my family put the responsibility of herding the sheep on my hands before I could even go to school. Caring for the sheep involved a strict schedule and routine. I woke up before the sunrise, took the herd to the hills, and came back in late evenings as the sun was setting. This task may sound like it was an easy chore, but it actually came with a lot of responsibility. And I don't know how familiar you are about the value of domestic animals in my culture, but they are to be treated like treasure and great wealth. So you have to be very alert and cautious with how you take care of them. You have to make sure that every sheep has enough to eat, has enough rest, and is protected at all costs and at all times. Kind of like your girlfriend. So back to story time. I remember this one day I took the herd to the hills, and I'm not sure how familiar you are with the geography and causes of war in Afghanistan, but most of these hills are still filled with landmines from the Soviet invasion. So you have to be very careful in determining explosives and keeping away from them. So this one late afternoon, I decided to relocate the sheep because I got into a fight with a shepherd boy who was mad at my sheep for not leaving any grass for his. I mean, first come, first serve, and as they say, the early bird gets the worm. So as I was bringing my sheep down the hill, boom, one of the landmines went off. And as I looked back, a couple of his sheep were blown up into pieces. I felt so terrified and sad for him. I felt his fear as it sent shivers down my spine, because both him and I knew that that meant a lot of trouble as soon as he got home because he didn't do his job well. Fast forward to my late childhood years, attending school became very difficult. I loved learning, but I would always end up leaving the school with bruises and blood. And if you must know anything about the Afghan education system, it is highly influenced by one's racial and ethnic background. Because I was Hazara, teachers would fail me and punish me in class intentionally, because Hazaras are believed to be not as intellectual as other ethnic groups, and because Hazara education is threatening. It's threatening to the terrorist groups because it means rebellion, and that's why they shut down schools every single day. It's threatening to the other ethnic groups because they want to continue enslaving the Hazaras so that we don't rebel and make more advancements than them. It was also hard because of poverty. My family lived under a roof that would cave in from all the snow and rain, and I did homework in the moonlight when we ran out of candles. I remember sleeping on a hungry stomach most of my life, or feeding on moldy bread and snow at times, which as a kid, I found delicious. I mean, some dirty snow and sugar? Yum! But in all seriousness, these times taught me some of the greatest lessons in life. They taught me to work hard, be resourceful, be resilient, and appreciate my two role models I call Aga Jan and Mother Jan, the most fearless parents. My father taught me many skills and showed me how to love life even with its dark side. Although he was half paralyzed and could hardly eat, talk, or move due to the Taliban torture earlier in his life, he still tried his hardest to take care of my needs by selling his rings or making me pencils out of tree branches. He also taught me to protect my family by training me to shoot with a hunting gun, one of my absolute favorite memories of him. When he began preparing for the training, he had my siblings and I fill up my mom's water buckets with soil and stack them on top of each other and place them in the far corner of the yard and use them as targets. But the next day, when my mom would try to reserve water for the upcoming week, the water would drain out of the holes, and out came my very angry mom and chased us around the yard, while my father took zero blame for it. On the other hand, my mother taught me that there is always enough to share with your neighbor, because God will always multiply the smallest amount. She was also the super mom of my life who took both the male and female role in my life while my father was paralyzed. She provided protection and most of our finances. She made sure that my siblings and I had some type of weapon with us at all times, and that we knew what to do when we faced any type of threat in public. And she might have taught us a little too aggressively, because I almost gouged out the eyes of a man who once groped me in the bazaar. And most importantly, she taught me how to trust God and take in the rejected and those in need. In the community where I spent most of my childhood, most babies born as girls were thrown into trash or had their lives taken away one way or another, and women were punished for birthing girls. In these situations, I would see the kindness and leadership of my mom as she extended a hand to the rejected. She would always try to take these babies before it was too late and raise them. So I grew up thinking I had many twins. I saw my mother take in many disabled individuals and others who were just as poor as my families. She took care of them like her own blood and sent them off better than we had first welcomed them under our leaky roof. My parents were also strong advocates of education. My mom was illiterate and wanted to push her children to be educated and change the systems for good. However, this often drew many threats from the conservative communities who found female education a threat to traditional Islamic Afghan values. They found it a disgrace for girls to get the same education as boys, and in order to fix this mistake, they beat my parents in public, they kidnapped my siblings, and attempted murder on us frequently, hoping that our way would stop corrupting the rest of the community. And most importantly, my parents taught me that self-sacrifice comes naturally, straight from the heart and with great passion, when you truly care about your community and the good of society. So you could imagine how much it affected me losing them when I moved all the way across the globe. Right before I entered high school, the Taliban finally shut down my school after many unsuccessful attempts. But thanks to Google, I found multiple schools, applied, and got accepted here in the United States to continue my education. But this opportunity also meant working up the courage to accept the end of my memories and time with my family. Shortly after starting school here, multiple terrorist attacks took away many of my friends. My father passed away after his long battle with the Taliban torture he had faced. And losing my friends and family drove me to mourn, but grow and fight, all while battling with severe PTSD. Nightmares, damaged memory, and a lot of mental health challenges did not stop me afterwards, but allowed me to push every single day because I have one goal in mind: to fight for justice in a better world. And as a result, I realized it can get very exhausting. But every morning I open my eyes, the children in rags, the woman burned alive, my niece crying as I left for the airport, remind me that I have to go on, that I have to be tough even more here than I had to growing up in a society that condemns you to death if a girl simply picks up a pencil. I had to be even more tough being here because it meant starting all over in a whole new culture, all on my own, and struggle with finding shelter, with what to eat next, with how to cover my finances in high school. But most important of all, it meant trusting that I was covered in God's protection. Today, I'm here because of the many sacrifices made not only by Aqajan and Madarjan, but because of men and women who leave their own home to invest and plant hope in their neighbors. Today, I serve my community, both local and worldwide, because I want to make sure that no child knows war before they pick up a pencil, and that no child grows up thinking a graveyard is their playground. Today, I serve because I sense hope, and I will make sure to the best of my ability that every child and every woman and every one of my persecuted brothers and sisters get to live in dignity and civility. Today, I am an activist for the girls who had to pay the price for their fathers' and brothers' failures and acts of cowardice. For the days many like myself got assaulted without the government holding men accountable. For the days I stood helpless, watching my mom fall to her knees with tears in her eyes saying, "You have to go," as I left her behind. Today I speak without any fear holding me back, because everything I had was taken away from me. My childhood, my family, my education, the place I should call home, and the comforting arms of my mother. I am no longer afraid of facing bullets for seeking justice for Afghan children, women, and minorities whose cries are continuously silenced and ignored. I may continue to receive death threats, but my experiences have taught me that Afghan women are hard to break even if they bend. Today, I applaud the women who are getting their education, who are leading organizations, who are empowering each other, and together protecting their sheep and making Afghanistan the place it was before the war. Thank you.
Yeah, fresh up. Any words to share with us? I mean, I certainly am so moved and so honored to have you share your story and your experience, and I feel called to action. So I want to turn it over to you to see if you had anything else that you wanted to share with us before opening up to Q&A.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it was awkward watching myself. But on top of that, some of the content in there may have felt irrelevant, but this was because it was my keynote for a previous presentation. So I'm now open to the Q&A.
I think a lot of us are just letting the power of your story sink in a little bit. But I'm kind of curious because it's a huge emotional toll moving from country to country. But you did it so young. And can you kind of elaborate a little bit on how old were you when you came? Did you come to Michigan? Who did you stay with and whatnot? Just kind of elaborate that part of your story a little bit.
Yeah, I moved here when I was 15. Yeah, so, and now I'm a junior in college, so you can do the math for me. Yeah, it was definitely interesting when I came here. So I had a scholarship to a boarding school in Texas, but the scholarship expired halfway through high school. And so that left me with nothing. I had to leave the school, the dorm, and everything, and there was nothing left for me. And at the same time, I couldn't go back home because my father had just passed away, and my mom was just freaking out over the phone. She was like, "You cannot come back. There is nothing here for you. And if you come here, we're all gonna be dead." Just because, not because I like to make trouble there, but I just feel like, you can't make a revolution if you stay silent. And so when I was young, I felt like that was my mission. And so my mom thought even like as soon as I come to the airport, I probably wouldn't even make it out of there, that I would be hanged or something. And even if I did, they thought that my uncles, so in my culture, like when the man of the house dies or something happens to him, then the authority of the woman and the children moves on to the uncle or whoever else, And so she was like, your uncle's gonna get you married to someone who's 40 years older than you, who already has 5 other wives. And so it was really hard because I was just super stuck here. And so it was difficult, and that kind of left me like homeless at that point. And so I was always like looking for different resources and just like, trying to contact everyone I could. So I was like I almost went to, homeless shelters multiple times, but then on top of that, I was trying to contact different people like, hey, I'll do this, like if you let me stay. So, like I just kept moving until I got up here up north and in Michigan. And then I was so glad that I could finally be stable in the same place for a few years. So I don't know if that answered all of your questions, but feel free to ask me that again if I didn't cover it.
That was great. Thank you.
Michael, I see your hand up. I'll let you ask and then we'll pop to Phoebe's question in the chat.
Sure. Yeah. So I am speechless. I have no words. That was one of the most amazing stories I've ever heard. And when's your book coming out? Because I'll be the first one to buy it. So I guess my two questions are, one, you talked about a little bit at the beginning, like the stereotypes or the misconceptions about Afghanistan that we have because of our media. And so do you, like when you hear people have those misconceptions, do you get annoyed? Do you think it's like, it's your mission or your place to kind of educate people, or you think like they should be left to themselves and maybe try to educate themselves? And second, sorry, I don't know if you want to answer that one first before my second question. Okay. And then my second question is, what can we do to help? Like, how can we raise awareness on these issues?
Yeah, thank you so much. So I guess I'll start with, your the first one. So yes, I do get very irritated. I used to be a lot more polite and nicer when I was younger, because that was a big part of my culture, that like whenever, especially somebody older than you, like says something, you don't want to disrespect them and hurt their feelings. So you also don't want to educate them about the right things. So I let that happen a lot in high school. But then towards the end of high school, I was like, no, this needs to stop. Like, why am I saying yes? Like, yeah, we have camels. Like, I had one in my backyard. Like, no, I didn't. Like, and then people would, come up to me like, hey, so like, I know this Arabic song, but I don't know what it's saying. Can you like translate it to me? Or like, I want to say this to, a certain person, but like, I don't know how to write it in Arabic. And I'm like, I don't either. Like, I don't know, but we can learn Arabic together if you want to. Just like, silly things like that. Or like when I came here, they were like, oh, you poor thing, you must hate the snow. Is this your first time seeing this white fluffy stuff? I'm like, this is like, like, I love America, but like, come on, like your education system is the highest in the world. So, anyway, so I'm just gonna leave that there. So yes, I do get irritated. But the second one, thank you so much for asking that. I would, right now I started a campaign, and it's currently just on Instagram, but please follow or just like share it with everyone, or even just, sharing it about the genocide. So it's called Hazara Advocates USA. And, so just over the last year, the Hazara population went from 9% to 8%. And that was in less than a year. And the government isn't doing anything. And it's very sad, because so a lot of that aid that's going from the US and these other international countries, it's going to the hands of the same people in the Afghan government who are permitting this genocide to happen on the Hazaras. And so, you want your tax dollars to go towards something good, not to clean out a whole population of people. So, and the scary thing is, I don't want it to be like what happened with the Rwandan genocide. I don't want people to get there when it's way too late, when all the harm and damage has been done, when a whole population of people has been gone, who is native to the land, more than these other people who, moved in and started wiping them out. So, yeah, right now I'm just working on that campaign. And so my goal for especially the next upcoming years are to spread more awareness to the world. And I'm working on a project that I am trying to get to the United Nations. So I would definitely love like all your support and all of your involvement in that.
I have a question if I can ask. So in the beginning, Havala talked about fragmentation, was that the word? So I'm sure, I mean, we're all in the process of becoming and learning. And I think you did mention mental health and just like PTSD and all that. I'm sure it's still, you're still processing. I don't want to assume, are you still kind of reconfiguring and integrating back and then recycling that? Like what does that look like for you? And especially when social justice, sometimes it's thrown around really easily here when we're privileged and when we're in privileged contexts, but especially for you, social justice is a lot more physically real in a sense. And not to that came out wrong, but you know what I mean? Like, so yeah, how do you navigate that when you're, does that question even make sense? I'm sorry, guys.
So like, I guess
I'm like processing as I'm talking.
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess I don't know if like I understood it wrong, but correct me if I did. So like, are you like trying to ask about like how I'm dealing with it like mentally?
Yeah, like how are you, because I know you're going forward, but still there like we're human, right? Like there's times where it gets exhausting and it gets really tiring. How do you navigate that? And then the second part can be a second part question. Sorry.
No, that's fine. Yeah. I know, I guess like I'm a big workaholic, and it literally took me until this year when the pandemic hit for me to like sit myself down and like tell myself to like breathe and take care of myself. And I realized that like there are some times that I still get a lot of like flashbacks constantly where like I can't focus on, on school or whatever, or like I still have a lot of nightmares. Like last week, I had this like I was like wide awake, but I still like couldn't wake up of like my dad being like tortured and like everything that happened. It's like I got up, I was like crying and like screaming, and like it gets scary. Sorry. Whew. But yeah, I like try to, just sometimes like get off of social media and just like completely just have that time to myself. Like I watch Afghan shows, I cook, I craft a lot. But I think the number one motivation for me has been my niece. So like I basically raised her until I moved here, and she has been the biggest inspiration for me. Just like every morning I wake up, I like hear her voice, and I always think about her. And she just such a young age, she has been such a warrior for me. And I don't want her generation, I don't want the next generation, to grow up with the same experiences. And so I want to make sure that they get to live in a safer world, in a safer era where justice actually matters, where voices actually matters, where basic human rights can actually be practiced. But like it definitely is just a process and always learning. And my computer's about to die, so I'm gonna run to my charger. You guys can see my house.
Thank you for sharing that vulnerability, Freshta. Can only imagine the continual processing and navigating life here while still holding so much of home within you and physically still there. I really appreciate that vulnerability, and I think it opens up our eyes. Yoram, I don't mean to put word into your mouth, but I feel like Freshta kind of answered that second part of your question in her response of that physical, like the physical safety that her family and she daily, really navigated. Where a lot of times I think in the States and in our society, when we talk about social justice, it's more a philosophical rather than a physical safety, is how I heard your question asked. So I feel like Fresh answered that. Sarah, I'll allow you to ask a question. I see your hand is up.
Sorry, real quick, I know we're running out of time. Here in the States, when you run into other Afghan Americans or Afghan nationals, do you still find the same prejudice here that was in Afghanistan? And how do you deal with that, knowing that they also have a very similar, not the same, but similar background as you, and that prejudice still exists in a completely different place?
Yeah, no, I still face it, and right now, I'm at my adopted family's house, and they also host another girl from, the Pashtun ethnic group who is in charge of carrying the genocide on my ethnic group. And it's just, kind of still crazy for me that how, no matter how much, we grow up, how far we get from our culture and stuff, that a lot of that discrimination and the ugly crap sticks with you. Like even here, I've had my food poisoned. Like even I'm at the airport seeing like especially like the other Afghan men, they start doing a bunch of just like verbal assaults. And I know like there are other, it's like even here, I have a hard time connecting with other Afghans, especially if they're not from my ethnic group. And like I remember when I was flying out of Texas, like when I had first moved here. So like how like the whole Asian hate is happening right now. That is what's happening towards my ethnic group, because we're the only ethnic group in the country who look Mongolian, because we share the same ancestors as most Eastern Asians. And so, and like we are native to the country, to the land, and their ethnic groups moved in a lot later. And for some reason, we always they always like tell us just very nasty things. Like the one at the airport in Texas, these two guys, Pashtun guys, were like walking past me and they're like, "Ching chong chong, go back to China," and things like that. Those are like things I grew up hearing constantly. Like you can't even be at peace in your own land, in your own home. So it's just continues like just blowing my mind how uneducated and hateful people can be, even when they move miles away from all of that.
Thank you for sharing that experience. Recognizing that we have about 2 more minutes here before 4, and knowing that it is a Friday, I will say we are still going to open up breakout rooms at the end here if we want to do some final small group processing. If you need to leave at 5, not at 5, at 4, certainly feel free to check out. A few things I want to kind of leave us with is, first of all, if we can all turn our videos back on and just give, however visually we can give it, the biggest kudos to our 4 presenters today. I feel totally floored. I mean, truthfully, I'm a little bit at awe, but I feel like through those presentations, starting with kind of the integration of self, and then Michael talking about the autonomy, and finding that autonomy in ourselves, questioning the authority, not letting society tell you who you are, Fresh to sharing entire genocide that is happening that we don't hear about because only one story is told when we only look through the media. And Megan, I loved what you said of, if you can answer this question quickly, then you're probably not thinking hard enough. And so what I hope and what I feel is that, at the end of this Leader Lab, we're leaving with more questions than answers. And I think that that's a really big part of our leadership and life journeys. And so I thank you all for presenting these questions, presenting these avenues for showing up, learning more, and fighting these systems that are wrong, and but also hold a lot of complexities. So I think that will lead us into our last self-reflection, which is responding to ambiguity in the best possible way. I thank you all so much. We're going to go into breakout rooms to do some final processing with that. And happy Friday, everyone. Thank you for joining us in this learning and continual questioning.